The night of August 5th, 1945, falls over Hiroshima with the slowness of a sigh. The lights of the street lamps begin to go out one by one, and the warm air of the Japanese summer slips in through open windows, carrying the murmur of the Ota River and the song of crickets. It is a quiet night, almost too quiet, one of those in which the world seems to pause for an instant to listen to its own silence. At first glance, Hiroshima could be any other peaceful city of post-war Japan. The streetcars rest in rows, the markets close, the children sleep with cheeks flushed from the heat, and mothers fold clothes still warm from the day that has just died. From the air, the city shines like a mosaic of lights scattered among the dark arms of the river. Nothing foretells that this glow, this calm, and this life are about to become a memory suspended in time. Hiroshima, with its temples, its schools, its orderly streets, and its rebuilt castle, seems a place that breathes hope, unaware of the distant roar of the war that is already deciding its fate on other Pacific fronts. Before we continue, I'm very curious to know from where in the world and at what time you're joining tonight. I'd love to read you in the comments. It's fascinating to imagine how many different corners are connecting now to travel together to the same night, to the same instant when the world was about to change forever. Because this story doesn't begin with an explosion, nor with an act of war, but with a silence. A silence that spreads like a blanket over the rooftops, over the trees in the parks, over the Shinto shrines and the wooden houses that smell of incense and freshly cooked rice. The sky is clear, and the almost full moon reflects on the waters of the river. The clocks show a little after 10 at night. Some soldiers at the local base check their positions. Orderlies at the military hospital change shifts with discreet yawns, and the last passers-by cross the Ioi Bridge without imagining that this very bridge, with its peculiar T-shape, will be the exact point over which an invisible aim will be fixed at dawn. On the nearby hills, the cigarettes of some youths glow like fireflies. They talk about trivial things, letters they haven't yet been able to send, the possibility that the war will end soon. In the center of the city, the station clock reads 10:45 p.m. The heat persists, sticky, motionless. People sleep with their windows open, letting the breeze carry fragments of conversations, the creak of tatami, the occasional bark of a dog. Everything seems exactly as it should be. But while the city surrenders to sleep, thousands of kilometers away, on a runway on the island of Tinian in the Pacific Ocean, the engines of a B-29 bomber begin to roar. The crew of the Enola Gay carries out their final checks under artificial light that barely manages to outline their tense faces. In the aircraft's metallic belly sleeps an object whose magnitude only a few understand. A uranium bomb christened with an almost childlike name, Little Boy. It is the first of its kind, a definitive experiment in a war that has driven humanity to limits few would have thought possible. The night, which in Hiroshima is calm and familiar, in Tinian is technical and mechanical. The men say little. The instruments hum, the mechanics adjust the valves. The air smells of fuel, tropical humidity, and nerves. At 2:45 in the morning, the Enola Gay rises slowly into the darkness. Its shadow is lost in the Pacific sky, carrying within it a decision that does not belong to those who execute it, but to history itself. Meanwhile, in the Yamaguchi home, near the Nakajima district, a mother wakes at the sound of her young son crying. She soothes him, takes him for a drink of water, and lays him back down. She does not know this will be the last night she can do so under that same roof. In another neighborhood, a doctor reviews his notes before sleeping. Tomorrow, he tells himself, he will attend early at the downtown clinic. A few meters away, an 18-year-old girl stores an envelope with a poem she hopes to give to a friend who is leaving for the front. These are small gestures, invisible details that only later history will turn into fragments of memory. Sometimes great events begin like this, with the most absolute normality, with the most innocent routine. Tragedies are not usually announced by drums or omens, but by the perfection of an instant believed to be eternal. And that night, Hiroshima is exactly that, the perfect image of a life no one imagines in danger. The civil defense loudspeakers have remained silent all day. There were no air alerts, no bombing signals. Rumors circulating among the population speak of cities like Tokyo, Osaka, or Nagasaki, which have suffered recent attacks. But Hiroshima, many think, does not have enough military importance to be a target. It is, to a large extent, a transit city, a resting point, a hardworking and quiet community. That false security spreads like a collective drowsiness. Time moves on. It is almost 11:30. At the castle, sentries change shifts, while the moon's reflection scatters over the waters of the moat. In the Buddhist temples, oil lamps go out one by one. Some monks, before sleeping, utter brief prayers for peace and for the rest of the souls the war has claimed. Outside, the sound of the crickets continues unchanged, as if even nature, in its innocence, had no awareness of what it is about to witness. There is a feeling in the air that is hard to describe, a mixture of serenity and expectation, as if time itself were holding its breath. And in some way, it is. Every passing minute brings the city a little closer to a dawn unlike any other. The night advances. The sky over Hiroshima is a deep dome, almost cloudless. From Mount Futabayama, one can see the city spread out, silent, bright. A city that does not suspect, that does not fear, that simply lives. And in that absolute calm, there is something profoundly human. The unconscious trust that the world will be the same upon waking. In a few hours, the clocks will mark 8:15. But for now, no one knows it. For now, there is only the whisper of water, the breath of wind among the trees, the faint sound of cicadas, the smell of summer, and the steady pulse of a city sleeping under the moon. And as the night stretches over Hiroshima's rooftops, the horizon begins to hint, far away, at the roar of propellers that cannot yet be heard, but are already on their way. Soon the sky will cease to be a silent refuge, to become the stage for the most devastating change humanity has ever witnessed. Before becoming a symbol of the destruction most feared by humanity, Hiroshima was a city of placid beauty and industrious spirit, a place where daily life intertwined with tradition and modernity in an almost poetic harmony. Situated in the delta of the Oda River, spread among 7 arms of water, it was known as the City of Bridges, and its landscape, dotted with temples, gardens, and little lanes, invited an unhurried walk. There, merchants, officials, monks, students, and soldiers lived side by side. A complex yet peaceful society that, despite the war ravaging the world, continued to breathe a certain normality. In 1945, Hiroshima had nearly 350,000 inhabitants. Its humid, warm summer climate filled the streets with sweet aromas. The flowers of the Shukeien garden, the freshly steamed rice drifting out of open windows, the incense on family altars. In the parks, children played with rag balls, and women, kimono sleeves tied up, washed clothes by the river. It was a scene that could belong to any era, and precisely for that reason it is so hard to imagine it was destined to vanish in a matter of seconds. The city, rebuilt several times over the centuries, after fires, earthquakes, and past wars, had always shown a surprising capacity to be reborn. Founded in the 16th century as a fortress of the Mori clan, Hiroshima had become, over time, a prosperous and modern urban center. Its electric trams, its commercial port, and its universities placed it among the most dynamic cities of Western Japan. From the early 20th century, its growth was steady. Textile factories, medical institutions, and government offices employed thousands. The castle, with its dark towers and fish-filled moat, rose as a reminder of the old samurai times. But on the nearby avenues, buildings of concrete and glass were already going up. At first glance, Hiroshima did not seem a city of war. Although it housed a regional military command, it had no giant arsenals or naval bases. Its profile was more civil than bellicose: hospitals, schools, banks, markets. That is why, when the sirens sounded, common enough in those final months of the conflict, many heard them without real fear. The war, they thought, was far away. Bombs fell on Tokyo, on Osaka, on Kure, but not on them. Hiroshima remained untouched, and that apparent immunity strengthened the illusion of safety. In the cinemas, patriotic newsreels were still shown. In the shops, merchants offered their goods beneath propaganda posters calling for sacrifice and patience. Women gathered fabric scraps to sew uniforms, the young marched to labor camps, and families huddled around small radios to hear imperial communiques. No one said it openly, but many sensed the end was near. Japan was exhausted. The bombings of Tokyo had reduced the capital to ashes. The imperial fleet was nearly destroyed, and food reserves dwindled by the week. Yet life, in its silent obstinacy, went on. Imagine walking its streets that first week of August. The air vibrates with heat and the cicadas never stop singing. On one side, fruit stalls display melons and plums. On the other, carpenters work beneath bamboo roofs, fitting beams or repairing boats. Near the station, a group of school children in white caps intones patriotic songs, while an old man, seated on a bench, watches the river without a word. Around him, the city hums with a serene, everyday, almost immortal energy. In the temples, the bells sound at dusk. Incense smoke rises in slow spirals, and monks pray for peace. Visitors leave offerings, coins, flowers, small pieces of paper with names and wishes. The prayers ask for the return of sons fighting in China or the Philippines, for the health of the wounded, for an end to sad news. Although propaganda speaks of heroic victories, people know the reality is otherwise. Rations grow scarcer, rice is bulked with barley or bits of sweet potato, and nights are interrupted by alarms of possible air raids. Even so, the city keeps functioning, as if its will to live were stronger than fear. One of Hiroshima's most endearing traits was its people. Kind, hardworking, deeply bound by neighborhood ties. Families shared food, helped with repairs, and jointly cared for children when mothers were ill. The elderly, seated at their doors, were living libraries telling stories of the past. And among them there was a common certainty. No war can last forever. Soon, they said, everything will return to calm. But that calm was already an illusion. In the last days of July, the war had entered an unknown phase. The Japanese High Command, split between surrender and resistance, ignored Allied warnings. In secret, the United States had tested a new weapon in the New Mexico desert, a fire no army had ever seen. Hiroshima, for its topography, stable weather, and medium size, had been chosen as one of the ideal targets to test that power. No one in the city could know it. No one could imagine it had become, unwittingly, the stage for a decisive experiment. Meanwhile, the days kept passing. Children collected crickets in the parks. Young couples strolled at dusk over the Motoyasu Bridge, and fishermen cast their nets from the banks. Every gesture, every smile, every word had a value only the future would make evident. It was an ordinary life, but it was precisely in that everydayness that its fragility lay. At the Red Cross Hospital, Dr. Hachiya noted in his diary the growing number of patients suffering from malnutrition and fatigue. At the Meteorological Observatory, the forecast indicated clear skies for the coming days. In schools, teachers spoke of discipline, of national pride, and of the duty to resist, though deep down they knew the war was already lost. Everything went on as if fate were determined to maintain the appearance of normality until the last instant. That afternoon of August 5th, The sun fell with a golden light over the rooftops. On balconies, women hung clothes, children threw stones into the river, and street vendors closed their stalls. No one noticed the small details that, in retrospect, would seem like signs. The flight of a lone plane, the sudden silence of the cicadas, the stillness of the air. The city was preparing for another warm summer night, unaware it was the last. Sometimes history teaches us that the greatest cataclysms are born from the most peaceful instant. That beauty can be, unwittingly, the antechamber of tragedy. Hiroshima, with its clean streets and cheerful voices, with its ancient temples and persevering spirit, was about to witness the limit of the human condition. And as night slowly descended over the rooftops and rivers of the city, far away, in the darkness of the Pacific, a plane with a mother's name and a deathly destiny was already approaching, crossing the sky with its invisible cargo. In the early hours of August 6, 1945, while Hiroshima sleeps wrapped in the warmth of summer, more than 2,000 kilometers away, on the island of Tinian, an American airbase seethes with activity. It is 2:30 in the morning, and under the yellowish glow of the floodlights, mechanics and pilots work in silence, focused, as if they knew they were about to write a page of history no one would ever erase. The air is dense, heavy with salt and kerosene. The engines of the B-29 bombers roar with a deep, metallic rhythm that seems to make the entire runway tremble. One stands out among them, a silver plane christened Enola Gay in honor of the mother of its pilot, Colonel Paul W. Tibbets. Its silhouette gleams under the moon, immaculate, almost solemn. Inside, the crew completes the final preparations. The atmosphere is strange, neither heroic nor festive, but rather quiet, restrained, almost ritual. No one knows exactly what they carry on board, though all suspect it is not an ordinary bomb. The official order speaks of a new type of weapon to be dropped on a specific target under perfect weather conditions. Tibbets, 30 years old, checks his watch. Beside him, Major Tom Farabee reviews the route. The bomber will climb to over 9,000 meters, fly over Iwo Jima, then turn toward the Sado Inland Sea, and finally reach its destination, a Japanese city that until that moment, few of them could place on a map. Hiroshima. The operation has been planned with surgical precision. On board, in addition to the weapon, travel measuring instruments and special cameras to record the impact. Everything is designed to observe, measure, learn. What is coming is not only an attack, but a demonstration. A definitive trial of the power of a newly born technology. In the hold, secured with care, is the bomb Little Boy, an engineering piece of nearly 4 tons, loaded with uranium-235. Its mechanism combines an impressive scientific complexity with a terrible simplicity. Upon detonation, it will release an energy that until then existed only in physicists' equations. The men of the crew ignore most of the details. What they do know is that their mission must be carried out without possible error. Each fulfills his role with military discipline. Check, adjust, confirm. In the air, there will be no room for improvisation. Shortly after 2:45, the Enola Gay begins its taxi down the runway. The roar of the engines breaks the tropical silence. The plane's lights are lost in the darkness, and the craft's shadow rises slowly until it blends with the night. As the plane gains altitude, over Hiroshima the moon still shines serenely. The lights of the houses have gone out, and the city sleeps under an almost unreal calm. No one could imagine that, at that very instant, an unimaginable device is cutting through the sky toward them. During the first hours of flight, the crew keeps a concentrated silence. The engines purr with a hypnotic, steady rhythm, like a heart of steel beating in the dark. Below, the Pacific Ocean stretches like a mirror without limits. Some try to sleep a few minutes, others stare through the portholes, perhaps thinking of their families, of the future, of the war that seems to be nearing its end. On the ground, the leaders of the Manhattan Project, among them Robert Oppenheimer and General Leslie Groves, await reports with expectation. Barely 3 weeks earlier, in the New Mexico desert, the first atomic test, called Trinity, had lit the sky with a glare that made even the scientists who designed it tremble. "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds," Oppenheimer murmured, quoting the Bhagavad Gita. But the phrase appeared in no official report. It only floated in the air, like a silent warning. The idea of dropping the bomb on Japan responded to a mix of strategy and political calculation. The Allies wanted to end the war without a land invasion that would have cost hundreds of thousands of lives. At the same time, the United States sought to demonstrate its power to the world, and especially to the Soviet Union, at the dawn of a new geopolitical era already in sight. Hiroshima was chosen for several reasons: its clear skies, its ideal size for measuring the impact, and the fact it had not yet been bombed, which would allow the effects to be observed clearly. In the documents of the time, that almost mathematical coldness contrasts with the human magnitude of the act being prepared. As the Enola Gay nears Japanese territory, the sun begins to rise. It is 6 a.m. From the air, the archipelago emerges among mists. The islands outline themselves like gray brushstrokes on the blue sea. On the radio comes a message: "The weather over Hiroshima is perfect. Clear sky, no clouds." It is all they need to hear. On board, Ordnance Technician Morris Jepson begins the final phase, activating the bomb's electrical components. The procedure requires calm and precision. Every movement is timed. An error could be fatal. Tibbets keeps his eyes forward, serene, with the discipline of one who has accepted that, sometimes, obeying an order means altering the course of the world forever. On the horizon, the sun rises over the mountains. Below, Hiroshima wakes slowly. Streetcars resume their routes. Schoolchildren breakfast on rice with miso. Offices open their doors. Life follows its usual rhythm, completely unaware of the plane approaching high above. At 7:30, an alarm sounds in the city. A solitary B-29 has been detected at high altitude, but the signal is canceled a few minutes later. "It's a reconnaissance plane," announced the loudspeakers. People breathe easier. There is no danger. No one imagines that this flight is not a mere observer, but part of the prelude. At 8:09, the Enola Gay sights the Ota River and Hiroshima's silhouette spread out under a golden light. Tibbets orders the altitude leveled. In the bay, Little Boy is ready. Major Farabee adjusts the optical sights and fixes the point of impact. The Ioi Bridge, in the heart of the city. A precise point, easily recognizable from the air. In those final seconds, time seems to stretch. The plane continues its trajectory smoothly. The sky is so clear, so blue, that no one below looks up. The cicadas sing. The clocks mark 8:15. At 8:15 in the morning on August 6, 1945, Hiroshima ceases to exist as its inhabitants knew it. The sky, which an instant before was an impeccable blue, opens into a white wound, so intense that not even the sun can compare. It is a flash that does not illuminate, but devours light itself, a thunderless lightning that expands in all directions with the force of 1,000 storms. In less than a second, the temperature at the epicenter surpasses 4,000 degrees Celsius. Everything that breathes, everything that burns, becomes shadow or ash. The Ioi Bridge, the Enola Gay's aiming point, becomes the center of a sphere of fire. The shockwave travels at more than 600 meters per second, toppling buildings, ripping trees out by the roots, pulverizing glass and bone alike. Roofs bend, walls disintegrate, streets fold in on themselves. The shadows of people and objects are imprinted on walls like ghostly traces, marks that will remain there for years, mute witnesses to an instant that lasted less than a blink. For a few seconds, absolute silence reigns. a silence so pure it feels like the end of all things. Then the sound arrives, brutal and deafening, like the roar of a giant waking in fury. The entire city shudders, vibrates, collapses. A wave of burning air expands in a spiral, enveloping everything in its path. Fire spreads with impossible speed. Wood, paper, human skin. Everything catches, everything melts. Birds flying over rooftops fall as ash, and the rivers boil in their channels. More than a kilometer from the epicenter, people are hurled through the air like leaves in a gale. Those who were in the street are blinded by the light. Many believe for an instant that the sun has fallen to earth. Some manage to murmur a prayer before they are engulfed by the flame. Others simply vanish, dissolved in the glare. The explosion consumes the air itself, lungs empty, oxygen becomes fire. The city, seen from above, stops being a lattice of streets and rivers. It is now a growing cloud, a vortex rising, a monster of steam and dust coiling upon itself. From the Enola Gay, the crew watches open-mouthed the birth of that column that will soon take the shape of the atomic mushroom. None speaks a word. Major Farabee can only murmur, "My God, what have we done?" On the ground, the scene is of unbearable surrealism. Houses vanish beneath mountains of rubble. Temples collapse. Power poles, melted, fall like incandescent spears. Hiroshima Castle, a symbol of centuries of history, becomes a blackened skeleton. The air vibrates with a heat that seems to have a life of its own, as if the sky itself were breathing fire. In the center, directly beneath the point of explosion, everything has volatilized. Nothing remains. No buildings, no bodies, no matter. Only a crater of light, a polished surface where once a living city stood. Farther out, in the outlying districts, flames begin to spread. The wind, fed by the blast's heat, blows hard in all directions, fanning the fires. People run without direction, their skin burned, their clothes in rags, their eyes wide. They do not understand what has happened. Some think a munitions depot has exploded. Others think the sky has fallen. No one can imagine they have witnessed the first nuclear attack in history. The light has been so violent that it has left many who looked up at the sky at the instant of impact blind. The glare in less than a second burned their retinas. Some die without knowing it, simply because the air can no longer be breathed. Radiation, invisible, begins to penetrate the bodies of survivors, altering their blood, their skin, their future. Clocks stop. Almost all show the same time, 8:15. That detail, insignificant on any other day, now becomes a symbol. Time, literally, has frozen. Hiroshima ceased to exist at the very instant the second hand halted over the 15. The following minutes are a mixture of silence and chaos. Survivors who can still move search for their families among dust and flames. The wounded call out, though almost no one can hear them. Streets, once so orderly, have become a labyrinth of ruins and fire. The air smells of metal and burned flesh. The rivers, once crystalline, turn dark with ash that falls like a gray snowfall. At the Red Cross Hospital, one of the few buildings left standing, doctors are overwhelmed. The corridors fill with the injured. There are not enough medicines, nor water, nor electricity. Patients arrive wrapped in blankets or carried on other shoulders. Many cannot even speak. They only moan or walk with their arms outstretched, as if the air still burned them. Skin, in some cases, hangs in strips, and faces are unrecognizable. Dr. Hachia, who will later recount what happened in his diary, will recall that the silence of the wounded was more terrifying than the screams. Several kilometers away, in the fields surrounding the city, farmers look at the sky without understanding. A gigantic cloud, white within and gray without, grows and grows, reaching heights no volcano could match. It is the first atomic mushroom in human history, a shape almost beautiful in its symmetry, yet enclosing absolute horror. As it rises, the cloud changes color, from white to orange, from orange to dark red. At its base, the city burns like a furnace. The initial light, which had been as bright as 1,000 suns, has turned to half-light. A black rain begins to fall. It is a mixture of water, soot, and radioactive particles. Survivors lift their faces, relieved at first, because the rain seems to promise coolness, but soon discover it burns the skin. Some drink it, not knowing they are swallowing death. During the first 30 minutes, Hiroshima is nothing but an expanse of fire and silence. The wind carries away the cries. Ashes drift over the river, and the mountains reflect a reddish glow. By the minute, the flames advance, devouring what little remains standing. The shadows of bodies stay etched on the walls, motionless witnesses to the light that erased them. In the distance, the Enola Gay turns back toward base. The crew watches the spectacle from the air with a mixture of fascination and horror. It was like a fire that devoured everything, the co-pilot will later write. None of them will ever forget the sight of that city disappearing beneath a cloud that seemed to grow without limit. The world has just entered the atomic age, but no one knows it yet. In Hiroshima, the clocks remain stopped at the same hour. In Washington, President Truman is preparing to make the announcement to the world. And across the planet, millions of people continue their routines, unaware that humanity has just crossed an invisible frontier, a point of no return. The sun continues its course over a Japan that still does not know what has occurred. The mountains cast their shadows over a plain that no longer has a name. Where there were streets, there is now silence. Where there was life, there remains only a light that never should have existed. And as smoke rises into a sky that seems to watch it all with indifference, the first voices of survivors begin to emerge from the rubble, trembling, confused, human. The brightest dawn in history has just left behind the longest night in the world. Air, that invisible and vital element every breath takes for granted, becomes an enemy. In the streets of Hiroshima, what was once a summer breeze has turned into a burning current that scorches, suffocates, and drags. The explosion has not only disintegrated buildings and bodies, it has altered the very weather. The wind writhes, currents rise in spirals, and the heat from the ground melts metal, evaporates water, bends glass. It is a city where the air kills. From the epicenter, flames spread in waves, fed by the remnants of houses, fallen cables, cooking oils, and dry wood. In a matter of minutes, fires merge with one another until they become a single incandescent sea. The witnesses of that morning, the few who can still look, will later say that the fire seemed to have a will of its own, as if a faceless monster had awakened among the ruins. Between the districts of Nakajima and Honkawa, people run without knowing where. Some shout names that the wind carries off and dissolves. Others stagger forward, covered in white dust, with burned skin stuck to their arms. Clothes have vanished, reduced to rags. Faces are unrecognizable. Many walk without direction, without voice, without awareness, as if their bodies were shadows that do not yet know they no longer belong to the world of the living. Children look for their parents, parents for their children. The earth still trembles under the weight of an energy no one can understand. On the banks of the Ota River, the water becomes a refuge. Dozens of people hurl themselves into it to escape the fire that pursues them. But the water is boiling. Some try to swim and faint instantly. Others submerge themselves, desperate, believing they can endure a few seconds more. From the shores, those watching see currents carry bodies that float slowly. mixing with scraps of wood and debris. The scene seems like a delirious dream in which the world has inverted. The sky falls, the water burns, the earth breathes fire. In the Buddhist temples, the monks who have survived try to organize the wounded. Some pray among ruins, others open the doors to receive those seeking shelter. The temples built of wood soon begin to burn as well. The bells, heating up, crack and sound for the last time, as if the metal itself were letting out a lament. In a matter of hours, the entire heart of the city is a single blaze. There is no wind to disperse it. It is a fire that consumes the air and generates its own whirlwind. Scientists will later call it a firestorm, a phenomenon in which the heat is so intense it creates its own wind system, a kind of fiery hurricane that absorbs everything. The heat spreads to the farthest neighborhoods. In rural areas, more than 3 kilometers from the epicenter, windows shatter and leaves on trees begin to scorch. In the sky, smoke rises in columns that blend with the atomic cloud. From neighboring towns, farmers stare in astonishment at that sort of new sun still shining over Hiroshima. They cannot imagine that beneath that glow, no city exists anymore. At midday, the clarity of day disappears. Smoke and ash accumulate in the atmosphere, darkening the sky. The light turns reddish, then gray, then black. A thick rain begins to fall, formed by radioactive dust mixed with water and soot. It falls on survivors desperately trying to quench their thirst, on ruins that still smolder, on rivers covered with bodies. That black rain will forever mark the memory of those who saw it fall, a symbol of what the sky can do when science forgets compassion. Minutes stretch like hours. Amid the chaos, the instinct to survive drives some toward the edges of the city, along paths full of embers. Bare feet sink into hot mud. Makeshift hospitals spring up on the nearby hills, where the fire has not yet reached. There, the wounded crowd together, not understanding what has happened. Many repeat the same words. Hikari, Hikari. The light. The light. No one knows how to explain what has occurred. No one has ever seen anything like it. The doctors, the few who can move, improvise treatments. They cover wounds with whatever they find. Dirty bandages, pieces of clothing, damp leaves. The burns resemble nothing known. Skin peels at the touch. Some injured show no visible wounds, yet bleed from the mouth or ears. Radiation, invisible, begins its silent work. In the days to come, those same survivors will start to lose their hair. Their skin will blister, fever will consume them. But for now, there is only bewilderment. The city has become a lunar landscape, an expanse of ash where every step raises dust and memories. Sounds are minimal: the crackle of fire, the murmur of the river, scattered groans. Time seems to have dissolved along with the air. Morning turns to afternoon without anyone noticing. The sun is barely discernible behind the veil of smoke. Hiroshima, which until that morning was a place full of life, is now a shadow of itself, an absence visible from the sky. Later, the Enola Gay's pilots will write in their diaries that the blast's glare was so strong they could read the aircraft's instruments without artificial light. One of them will recall that during the return flight, no one spoke for more than an hour. They knew they had fulfilled their mission, but they did not fully understand what they had unleashed. At the base, upon landing, officers will greet them with applause, but most will not smile. Something inside them, though they do not yet know what to call it, has broken forever. Meanwhile, on the ground, those who still breathe try to find meaning amid the devastation. A mother walks holding her daughter's hand, both covered in ash. The girl asks for her father. The mother does not answer. Farther on, a young soldier searches for the barracks where he served. nothing remains. Among the ruins of the market, a dog licks the face of his motionless owner. Everything seems frozen, as if the whole world had been turned into an immense canvas of dust and fire. Toward evening, the heat begins to wane. The fire has consumed what it could consume. Along the riverbanks, survivors gather in silence. Some sing softly, as if the simple act of speaking words kept them human. The flames, at last, begin to die. Smoke rises toward a sky turning gray again. Bodies, shadows, fragments of life lie scattered as a mute testimony to what happened. No one in Hiroshima yet knows that what fell from the sky is not a conventional bomb. No one can imagine that the air itself has become poison. The word radiation is not yet part of the survivors' vocabulary. They only feel fatigue, thirst, the heat that does not cease. The air seems denser, heavier, as if the entire world had filled with invisible dust. As night falls, the wind changes. It blows from the sea and carries with it the metallic smell of the ruins. On the hills, the cicadas have fallen silent. The fire no longer burns, but the air still glows with a strange, faint, almost electric sheen. Hiroshima has passed from fire into shadow, and in that half-light begins the second chapter of the tragedy, that of those who survived the blast only to face what came afterward. The city still breathes, but every breath carries the seed of an illness no one knows. And as darkness covers the remains of the day, somewhere beneath the rubble, someone utters for the first time the word water, the most repeated plea of the hours to come. And here, perhaps, it is worth pausing for an instant. Imagine you are inside the plane, watching through the window as the world stretches beneath you, beautiful and fragile. You do not know how many lives beat down there, nor which stories are about to be extinguished. You only know that the future of the war, of the country, perhaps of the world, depends on a movement of your hand. At exactly 8:15, Farabi squeezes the trigger. The bomb falls. A small shadow detaches from the plane and descends slowly toward the city, spinning, swaying, while the Enola Gay climbs hard to get away from the point of impact. For 43 seconds, little boy falls in silence. Then, the world changes forever. The sky, which an instant before was blue and clear, becomes a new sun, dazzling, impossible to look at. A glare that surpasses in intensity everything known, followed by a wave of heat that turns air into fire and earth into dust. The men in the plane, even kilometers away, feel the blow of the shockwave. No one says a word. They only watch, stunned, as a gigantic cloud begins to rise from the ground, turning, growing, taking on a shape human language does not yet know how to describe. And as the Enola Gay disappears among the clouds, below, in Hiroshima, the silence of the morning is broken by a thunder that resounds beyond time. Dawn has ended. The world has entered another era. The day has passed. The fire no longer roars with the same fury, but the silence that replaces it is more unsettling than the flames. Hiroshima, as night falls on August 6th, is a vast field of ash. The air smells of smoke, iron, hot dust, and something no one dares to name. The moon barely filters through the cloud covering the city, a mix of soot, vapor, and suspended matter that has turned the sky dark gray, heavy, unreal. With every step, the ground crunches. There are no trees, no rooftops, no clear landmarks. Only ruins, steaming rivers, and bodies resting in silence under the shadows. Amid that stillness, voices arise. They are weak, broken, sometimes barely a murmur. Voices calling for someone, asking for help, seeking water. Mitsu, Mitsu, they repeat again and again. Water. It is the most human sound in a city that no longer seems so. Survivors, covered in gray dust, move slowly among the debris. They walk with their arms outstretched, not by habit, but because the pain in their skin prevents them from lowering them. Bodies, still alive, stagger like specters refusing to disappear. The streets, if they can still be called that, are covered in a dense, hot mud, a mix of ash, black rain, and remnants of burned structures. Every corner is a labyrinth of ruins. Some try to orient themselves by seeking the rivers, the Ota, the Motoyasu, the Honkawa. There, hundreds of people gather, wounded, thirsty, on the brink of unconsciousness. Water is the only hope, but also the final deceit. Many drink desperately, unaware that the river is contaminated with radioactive residue that fell with the rain. Some die instantly. Others feel relief for a few minutes before collapsing. Water, which had always been a symbol of purity, has now become poison. At the Red Cross hospital, Dr. Michihiko Hachiya wakes beneath the remains of his house. Injured, dazed, he manages to drag himself to the building where he worked, one of the few still standing. What he finds there is a vision impossible to take in. The corridors are full of wounded. There is no space, no stretchers, not enough medicine. Patients lie on the floor, on rags or scraps of paper. Most suffer burns so severe that the skin has taken on unrecognizable tones: red, white, black. Some moan without strength, others make no sound at all. Radiation, though no one yet knows its name, is already doing its invisible work. In schools, turned into improvised shelters, teachers try to organize the children who have survived. Many walk barefoot, with blackened faces and vacant eyes. The teachers gather them and count them, but the lists no longer mean anything. Half the names will never be spoken again. Even so, someone starts a children's song, perhaps to keep calm, perhaps to remember that routine once existed. The sound blends with the distant crackle of the last fires and with the hum of cicadas that, stubborn, still sing in some corner of the city. In the temples, Buddhist monks move among the rubble with a serenity bordering on the unreal. Some recite sutras for the dead, others distribute the little rice left to the wounded. In the Shukayan temple, survivors gather around the pond, where the water still holds a murky sheen, but seems less dangerous. There, in that small devastated garden, human suffering reaches a silent, almost sacred dimension. Prayers mix with sobs, and for an instant, compassion seems the only force keeping those still alive on their feet. Dawn on August 7th arrives with a weak, milky light. The sun barely pierces the haze. The birds have disappeared. Silence is broken only by the lament of the wounded and the creak of structures still collapsing. People move slowly toward the outskirts, seeking help. Many believe the army will arrive soon, that there will be doctors, water, food. But the reality is that no one outside Hiroshima yet understands what has happened. Communication with the city has been lost. From Tokyo come rumors: a great explosion, a new bomb. No one imagines that half of Hiroshima has been erased from the map. Among the debris, some survivors find photographs, toys, small intact objects. They keep them as if they were talismans of a life that no longer exists. A woman sits beside the remains of her house and combs the hair of her dead daughter, in silence, with a blackened wooden comb. An old man covers an unknown child with a blanket. A young soldier, wounded in the face, spends his last strength burying a comrade. These are minimal gestures, but profoundly human. In the midst of hell, there is still compassion. The doctors, exhausted, begin to notice something unsettling. People who seemed unhurt start to fall ill for no apparent reason. Their noses bleed, their hair falls out. Their wounds will not heal. Some vomit without stop. No one knows why. The doctors speak of a strange fever, but the term fails to describe what is occurring. Radiation, that invisible enemy, seeps into blood, destroys cells, alters the future of those who have survived the light and the fire. Hiroshima has moved from visible destruction to silent destruction. Throughout the day, local authorities try to send messages outside. One radio operator manages to transmit a brief report. Hiroshima, destroyed, many victims, impossible to count. The signal cuts off. In Tokyo, the military listen, stunned. At first, they think it is an exaggeration. Then they understand something unknown has occurred. But the information arrives late, confused, fragmented. The magnitude of the disaster surpasses all imagination. Meanwhile, survivors continue their exodus toward the fields. They walk barefoot, covered in soot. Some stop and look back to where their city once stood. From a distance, Hiroshima seems a single reddish glow beneath the haze. Those who look do not know whether they are seeing the smoke of hell or the earth's final breath. By evening, the rain returns. It is no longer black, but it is still thick. Water forms puddles in which the exhausted faces of those still breathing are reflected. In some places, survivors light small candles and place them on leaves they set afloat on the river. It is not a learned ritual. It is a spontaneous gesture, a way to bid farewell to those the water has carried away. The candles move slowly through the shadows, and for the first time since the previous morning, a faint gleam, not of destruction, but of remembrance, lights the city. Amid so much horror, something subtle occurs. The human instinct to care, to console, to survive begins to prevail over fear. There are no functioning hospitals, no visible leaders, no clear hope, but people keep helping one another. Monks share food. Doctors work without rest. Children search for other children so as not to feel alone. In the midst of silence, humanity endures. And as the second dawn rises over the ruins, a rumor begins to grow among the survivors. They have seen reconnaissance planes flying high, very high, over the remains of the city. No one knows whether they bring help or herald another catastrophe. But everyone looks up, fearful, with hearts suspended. Light filters through the smoke again, and for the first time since the explosion, Hiroshima begins to understand its loneliness. The world still does not know what has happened, but the sky, once more, is about to be a witness. The sky over Hiroshima, which for 2 days has remained covered with smoke, slowly opens again on the morning of August 8th. The rain has stopped, and the air, though still dense, seems to have recovered some clarity. The survivors, exhausted, lift their gaze. Very high among the clouds, they hear a hum. It is not the roar of fire, nor the murmur of wind. It is a new sound, metallic, regular, planes. The planes return, but this time they do not bring death, but eyes. They are the reconnaissance B-29s sent by the U.S. Army to photograph the result of the attack. From their altitude, the pilots look down on a gray expanse, a void where a city should be. The Ota River is barely distinguishable, winding through what now looks like ash. There is no visible movement, no signs of life, only smoke. One pilot, astonished, will later say that Hiroshima looked like a white stain on the earth. None of them imagines that beneath that layer of dust, tens of thousands of people are still breathing. Meanwhile, at the Tinian Air Base, the Enola Gay has been back for 2 days. The crew has been received as heroic, photographed, congratulated, studied. Paul Tibbets, their commander, smiles for the cameras, but there is something in his eyes that cannot be seen. In the hours that follow, each member of the team retreats into his silence. Some write letters to their families. Others simply stare at the Pacific horizon. They have completed their mission with military precision, but the magnitude of what they have unleashed is something none can measure. On the very 8th of August, while the Americans analyze the aerial photographs, in Washington, President Harry Truman makes an announcement to the world. His voice, transmitted by radio, sounds firm, almost solemn. On August 6, 1945, an American airplane dropped a bomb on Hiroshima. It contains more power than 20,000 tons of TNT. With it, we have added a new and revolutionary force to war. If Japan does not surrender, more bombs like this will fall. The words, traveling on invisible waves, reach millions of ears in a matter of minutes. In the United States, the news is received with a mix of relief and astonishment. Many celebrate. The war, they think, will end soon. Newspapers publish headlines in enormous letters. Atomic bomb lays waste to Hiroshima. The power of the sun harnessed by man. Photographs do not yet exist, but imagination suffices. The message the U.S. government seeks to convey is clear. American science and industry have achieved a strength superior to any enemy. In Europe, the news spreads like lightning. Scientists who took part in the Manhattan Project read the communiques with a mixture of pride and guilt. In Los Alamos, where the bomb was born, some celebrate the technical success, while others, like physicist Joseph Rotblat, feel that humanity has crossed a threshold from which it cannot return. We have opened a door, Oppenheimer will say days later, and what we have seen on the other side should not belong to this world. In Japan, censorship and chaos make it hard for information to circulate. The Army's high command still refuses to accept surrender. Many do not understand the kind of weapon that destroyed Hiroshima. Some believe it was a mixture of incendiary bombs with gas. Only after a few hours do observers sent from Tokyo begin to return with incomplete and bewildering reports. The entire city has been annihilated. There are no buildings, no people. Everything disappeared in an instant. While governments argue, the skies over Hiroshima continue receiving visitors. New American planes, equipped with high-resolution cameras, fly slowly over the ruins. They do not drop bombs. They do not open fire. They only observe. From the ground, survivors watch them in fear, not understanding that those metal machines are documenting their tragedy. Many run to hide among the wreckage. Others raise their arms as if begging for help. But the planes do not descend. They will circle for a few minutes and leave, leaving behind the same silence with which they arrived. Hundreds of kilometers away, in Tinian, engineers unload the rolls of film. The images are developed in improvised laboratories. The first photographs show something no one had seen before: an entire city erased from the map. There are no deep craters or intact ruins, only a smooth gray surface, as if a gigantic hand had passed over it. Houses, temples, schools, streets, trees. Everything has vanished. For the military analysts, it is confirmation. The bomb has worked exactly as expected. For the few who grasp what it implies, it is a nightmare vision. In the Enola Gay, the crew tries to resume normality. Co-pilot Lewis writes in his diary, "When I saw the city disappear under that cloud, I realized we had done something that surpassed any war. And yet, I was told I should feel proud others cannot sleep." Sergeant Van Kirk confesses that every time he closes his eyes, he sees the same white light. There is no joy in their words, only a quiet bewilderment. In Hiroshima, the days pass with unbearable slowness. Survivors bury their dead in mass graves, raise shelters with what they find, and keep searching for water and food. No one knows that, from the sky, the very people who dropped the bomb are observing them through photographic lenses. The voices that rise among the ruins are weak, yet human. The city, though destroyed, keeps breathing, In Tokyo, the Japanese government is divided. Some generals propose continuing the war, even in the face of more attacks. Others call for immediate surrender. On August 8th, the Soviet Union declares war on Japan and invades Manchuria. The circle tightens. The next few days will be decisive. But while great decisions are made in offices and war rooms, on the ground in Hiroshima, small gestures continue to weave the real story. A nurse shares her last bowl of rice with a stranger. A Buddhist monk lights incense beside a pond where the ash of hundreds of people floats. A child searches for his mother with a melted doll in his hand. Life, obstinate, refuses to disappear. The aerial photographs of the days that follow will show more than ruins. In them, if you look closely, you can still make out human lines moving through the dust. The files of the injured, the groups raising makeshift tents, the figures walking toward the edges of the city. Tiny dark points over a white landscape. Analysts will call them thermal anomalies. Historians in time will recognize them for what they really were. The first steps of survival. And as the engines of the planes fade into the distance, the voices from below multiply. Hiroshima, even in its silence, begins to make itself heard. The world has seen from the sky what the earth can barely comprehend, but very soon the news will begin to arrive by land, and with them, the first words that will describe the end of the world in a human voice. In Hiroshima, time has lost its measure. Clocks have stopped at the same instant, 8:15. The hands, melted or twisted by the heat, forever mark the hour when light became death. The days that follow seem to pass outside the calendar, without beginning or end. The city lives in a strange suspension, as if the whole world had been submerged in a haze where sounds and memories mingle with the smoke. August 9th dawns with a pale, windless sky. At first glance, Hiroshima looks like a landscape after creation, an expanse of ash and ruins where contours have disappeared. The mountains surrounding the city are the only unmoving witnesses to what happened. From them, a colorless, lineless, soundless plain can be seen. Early on, the few trains that manage to approach stop before the inconceivable. There is no station, no platforms, no city, only a smoking scar among the rubble. Survivors begin to notice the effects of something they do not understand. Skin that burned before now becomes covered with purplish spots. Hair falls out in clumps. Wounds that seem to close ooze for no reason. Gums bleed. Fever rises. Some doctors speak of a mysterious illness, but no one yet suspects that the invisible enemy invading them is not an infection, but radiation. It is the beginning of a suffering that will last decades, the beginning of the tragedy of the Hibakusha, the bomb survivors. Throughout the day, bodies continue to be found among the ruins. In many cases, there is no way to identify them. Families bury what they find in mass graves. In the temples, monks set up improvised altars with stones, pieces of wood, or blackened Buddha figures. Each prayer is an attempt to order chaos, to return time to its course. But Hiroshima's clock remains stopped. American planes continue to fly over the area, taking photographs and measuring the extent of the devastation. In the images, the city looks like a spiral of dust. Green areas have disappeared. The rivers have overflowed, and the Ota's course is covered with floating debris. From the air, observers note with scientific precision the effects of the blast. Total destruction radius 2 kilometers. Secondary fires up to 4 kilometers. Collapsed structures 90%. The figures are exact, cold, and yet they fail to translate the essential. That beneath each figure is a name, a voice, a life. Meanwhile, Japanese journalists who managed to reach Hiroshima do so on foot or by bicycle. One of them, the Domei news correspondent, enters the city on the morning of August 9th and writes, There are no words in any language that can describe what my eyes see. Hiroshima does not exist. Only human shadows remain on the walls. His report will never reach Tokyo in full. Military censorship will hold it back. But fragments of his account will survive, passing from mouth to mouth like a whisper. That same day, hundreds of kilometers away, another atomic bomb falls on Nagasaki. The horror repeats, and the echo reaches even those still alive in Hiroshima. No one can believe it. Some think it is the end of the world, that the gods have decided to punish humanity. Others simply kneel, exhausted, without tears, without strength to imagine a tomorrow. In the hours that follow, the Japanese army begins organizing rescue missions. The first trucks arrive from Kure and Ujina, loaded with supplies and doctors. But the scene they find surpasses all training. Radiation has turned the area into a toxic territory. Many of the rescuers fall ill within days. Masks, gloves, bandages. Nothing protects against the invisible dust floating in the air. Without knowing it, they expose themselves to the same poison slowly devouring the survivors. Communications with Tokyo are confused. The imperial government is still trying to gauge the magnitude of the disaster. Ministers meet over and over, debating whether to surrender or continue the war. But with every passing hour, the decision becomes more inevitable. Hiroshima is not just a destroyed city. It is a warning. And while the high command deliberates, people on the ground keep dying. On August 10th, 4 days after the attack, the rain falls again. It is not the black rain of the first days, but a fine, almost clean rain that wets the ruins and extinguishes the last fires. Survivors feel it on their skin and believe that perhaps, at last, the sky has taken pity. In some temples, monks begin to gather charred bones and place them in urns. Others pray for the spirits who are not buried. On the bank of the Motoyasu River, a group of children lights small paper lanterns. They set them on the water, and the lights move slowly through the shadows, as if they were souls seeking peace. At that very hour, in the laboratories of Los Alamos, scientists study the results of Hiroshima with an almost clinical precision. They analyze data, thermal effects, radiation dispersion. Some, fascinated, speak of unprecedented scientific advances. Others, horrified, realize they have released something beyond their control. Humanity, for the first time, has touched the power to destroy itself. By around August 12th, rumors spread. It is said the Americans possess more bombs, that Tokyo will be the next target. Fear mixes with resignation. The few newspapers still circulating publish ambiguous communiques, but the Japanese people already understand the essential. The war is over, even if it has not yet been said aloud. In Hiroshima, wounds remain open. Those who do not die by fire die by fever. Those who survive begin to turn into witnesses. No one listens to them yet, but their memories will be etched with a precision that will defy time. The light that blinded the sky, the silence afterward, the thirst, the black rain, the screams in the river, the stopped clocks. Each keeps a fragment of that collective memory the world will one day need to understand. On August 15th, Emperor Hirohito speaks to his people for the first time over the radio. His voice, soft and distant, is heard in homes, shelters, ruins. He announces surrender. The war is over. For Hiroshima, however, the end of the war does not mean the end of suffering. Another struggle begins, a longer one. That of the living who must learn to exist among the dead. That of a city that will have to reinvent itself from the ashes. Time finally begins to move again, but not in the same way. The hands that were fused mark a fixed hour, a perpetual reminder. In Hiroshima, past and present have fused into a single instant. The one in which light fell from the sky and changed everything. And as the first news of the end of the war travels the country, A new feeling begins to awaken in the exhausted hearts of the survivors. A need to understand, to remember, to make sense of what happened before the world forgets it. The silence that had been fear begins to transform little by little into voice. On the morning of August 15th, 1945, Japan stops. In a country where the emperor's word has for centuries been an almost divine voice, his appearance on the radio is an unthinkable event. Families gather in silence around receivers. Soldiers halt their maneuvers. Children are brought indoors. For the first time in history, Emperor Hirohito will speak directly to his people. His voice sounds distant, tremulous, wrapped in archaic language that many barely understand, but the message is clear. We must endure the unendurable and surrender. For a few seconds, no one reacts. The silence that follows is denser than the words. Then, in different places across the country, sobbing begins to be heard. Some kneel, others cry out. Many simply stare into space. The most devastating war in history has ended. And yet, in Hiroshima, where time had stopped 9 days earlier, the news arrives like a distant echo. The city is too wounded to celebrate or mourn. There are no working radios, no streets to gather crowds, no intact temples in which to give thanks. There are only survivors watching the horizon without fully understanding what peace means. In Tokyo, newspapers publish special editions with a mix of relief and desolation. Headlines announce the surrender of the empire, but between the lines slip the first figures of horror. Hiroshima, destroyed by a new bomb. No details are mentioned, nor exact causes, nor the number of victims. The information arrives distorted, almost abstract. No one outside the city can imagine the real magnitude of the tragedy. And even so, the word atomic begins to circulate with a mixture of fascination and fear. In the United States, meanwhile, President Truman appears before the press with the air of one who has closed an era. He assures that the use of the bomb has saved countless lives and that, thanks to it, the war has ended sooner than expected. Photographs of Hiroshima have not yet been made public, but official communiques describe the attack as a surgical blow against a military target. The world breathes with relief, not knowing that beneath that narrative lies the human dimension of the disaster. American newspapers celebrate the scientific and technological victory. The New York Times publishes an article titled, "The Atomic Bomb, an Achievement of American Ingenuity." Names of physicists and laboratories are mentioned, formulas and figures of energy, but nothing is said of bodies, of faces, of children evaporated by the light. For most readers, Hiroshima is a concept, not a wound. Only a few dissenting voices, scientists, religious leaders, curious journalists, begin to question the moral cost of that victory. U.S. Army reports, by contrast, speak with laboratory precision. The first reconnaissance expeditions, sent in late August, describe the destruction in technical language. Devastated area, 13 square kilometers. Estimated temperature at ground zero, between 3,000 and 4,000 degrees Celsius. Immediate dead, more than 70,000. Each datum is a number, and each number is a life reduced to statistics. In the margins of those documents, some jot down observations, striking effects on organic materials, metal structures bent by heat, human shadows imprinted on walls. But while the world analyzes, classifies, and celebrates, in Hiroshima survivors keep digging among the ruins. The wounded who can still move help those who cannot. Families try to reconstruct the map of their neighborhood with what little remains. A corner of a wall, a burnt tree, a familiar stone. Many refuse to leave the city, as if leaving meant betraying those left behind. Nights remain dark and silent, broken only by monks' chants and the footsteps of those seeking their loved ones under the moon. Little by little, foreign journalists begin to arrive. The first to do so is Wilfred Burchett, an Australian correspondent, who manages to evade censorship and travel to Hiroshima by train on September 2nd. When he steps off at the station, he is met by a landscape no correspondent had ever seen. "It is a desert of dust and death," he will write in his chronicle. He walks for hours, finding no city proper, only an endless field of ruins. In an improvised hospital, he speaks with Japanese doctors who explain an unknown illness. Patients bleed without wounds, lose their hair, their skin is covered in sores. Burchett, impressed, drafts his article by hand and titles it, "The Atomic Plague in Hiroshima." It is the first text to show the world the truth that governments preferred to keep quiet. His chronicle, published by London's Daily Express, causes international shock. For the first time, words manage to pierce military censorship and describe the catastrophe from within. "I walked through the ruins," he writes, "and felt I had arrived at the end of the world." U.S. authorities attempt to discredit him, claiming he exaggerates, that his accounts are Japanese propaganda. But the seed of doubt has been planted. Other correspondents will follow his example and travel to southern Japan to confirm what Burchett had seen: a city turned to ash, and a population dying slowly from the effects of radiation. In the months that follow, images begin to circulate. Black and white photographs show what words can barely suggest: entire streets reduced to dust, building skeletons, charred bodies, stopped clocks. In one, a mother holds her wounded child in her arms. In another, a woman walks alone among the ruins, with a vacant gaze. These images change the world's perception. Suddenly, the bomb ceases to be a scientific achievement and becomes a warning. In Tokyo, Japanese doctors and scientists create the first teams to study the effects of radiation. They record symptoms, draft reports, preserve samples. They understand that what occurred in Hiroshima is not only a local tragedy, but a new phenomenon in human history. The war has ended, but it has left behind a legacy the world is only beginning to grasp: the possibility of its own annihilation. As the news spreads, the first moral questions arise. Was it necessary? Was it inevitable? Could the suffering of hundreds of thousands have been avoided? The answers, then, are unclear. In Washington, authorities defend their decision. In Tokyo, the defeated leaders remain silent. In the newly born nations, because the world, still stunned, is trying to found a global peace, debates about the future of atomic energy begin to occupy the front pages. Hiroshima becomes, in a matter of weeks, a symbol, the limit of what human beings are capable of doing. And yet, in Hiroshima itself, life does not stop entirely. Survivors begin to organize, to count themselves, to recognize one another. They are called hibakusha, the bombed. Their bodies are fragile, but their memory is indestructible. Some begin to write diaries. Others relate what they have seen to the few researchers who arrive. Their voices, still trembling, will be those that in the future sustain the truth that neither governments nor headlines managed to convey. The world, at last, begins to listen. Hiroshima ceases to be a distant word and becomes a warning that resonates in every language. And as the news of the end of the war mingles with the images of the end of a city, a new stage begins, one in which the living must learn to live with the memory of fire. When the first autumn breezes of 1945 blow over what was Hiroshima, the landscape seems to belong to another planet. Where bustling streets and ancient temples once stood, there now stretches a plain of rubble and twisted iron. The mountains surrounding it seem to watch, silent, a wound that will not heal. The city has no color anymore. Everything is an infinite scale of grays. The ruins, the dust, the clothes, the sky. And yet, beneath that dead surface, something tiny, almost invisible, begins to move. A blade of grass sprouts between the cracks in the ground. A charred tree, thought dead by all, shows a green trace again on its trunk. Nature, as if to remind humankind that life does not vanish so easily, begins its slow work of resurrection. The inhabitants who survived the bomb return little by little. Many do so dragging their feet, carrying on their backs the few things they managed to save: a blanket, a bowl, a blackened portrait. They do not return out of hope, but out of need. Hiroshima is their home, even if it no longer exists. The hibakusha, the bombed, settle among the debris, raising shacks from the remains of fallen houses, with sheets of metal, with planks. There is no electricity, no drinking water, no sufficient food. But where there are human beings, there is also the will to remain. And that will, fragile but stubborn, begins to sketch the first strokes of reconstruction. During the first months, the priority is surviving the winter. Cold pierces the bones and the rain turns the ruins to mud. Diseases multiply: dysentery, fever, infected wounds. Many die without seeing dawn. Even so, the hands that remain standing do not stop. Some dig shelters along the riverbanks. Others improvise communal kitchens where small rations are shared. Children collect bits of coal to light fires. Women prepare broths with roots and leaves. Amid devastation, solidarity becomes the only possible refuge. The city, little by little, regains sound. Not streetcars or market cries, but the voices of those working among the remains. Hammers can be heard, footsteps, sporadic laughter. In the ruined temples, monks ring the bells again, even if they are cracked. Each peal is a promise. We are still here. Doctors and nurses, many of them ill as well, organize improvised hospitals. The Hiroshima Red Cross becomes a symbol of resistance. There, doctors begin to record symptoms no medical manual had described before: hair loss, spontaneous bleeding, severe anemia, inexplicable exhaustion. It is radiation sickness, the bomb's invisible sequel. Japanese doctors, without resources, note each case with almost heroic precision. Those notes, written in notebooks stained with dust, will later become the basis for the first studies on the atom's effects on the human body. In the months that follow, American research teams arrive in Hiroshima to measure the magnitude of the impact. They set up laboratories, take samples of soil, of debris, of bodies. Scientists walk among the ruins with masks and notebooks, and although their purpose is technical, some are marked by what they see. The city's silence weighs on them more than the data they record. Hiroshima has become an involuntary laboratory, a mirror in which the scientific world sees reflected its own power and its own guilt. Meanwhile, children who do not fully understand what has happened turn the ruins into their playground. They play with what they find: pieces of metal, broken bottles, empty cans. Their laughter, at times, breaks the city's sepulchral silence. In them lies the deepest contradiction: life insisting on blooming right where death had declared itself the victor. As months pass, the first flowers bud in the charred parks. In spring, the cherry trees, against all odds, bloom again. Their white petals fall upon the gray dust, as if nature wished to cover the burned face of the world with beauty. This phenomenon moves the inhabitants and becomes a symbol. If the trees can bloom again, perhaps Hiroshima can too. The Japanese government, with help from international organizations, slowly begins reconstruction. New plans are drawn up, river routes reopen, temporary housing is built. The hands that raise walls are not those of architects, but of farmers, teachers, housewives. Each brick, each plank, is placed with a mix of fatigue and hope. No one forgets what happened, but all understand that the only way to honor the dead is to allow the living to go on existing. In 1946, the first artists and writers begin to arrive. Some had lost their families, others had escaped by chance. Their works, born among ruins, will bear witness to the collective trauma. Painters like Iri and Toshimaruki begin to portray scenes the eyes cannot forget. The shadows, the fire, the fused bodies. Their canvases, known as the Hiroshima panels, will travel the world decades later, showing the truth that words cannot contain. In improvised schools, teachers teach children to read and write with chalk made of ash. They speak not only of war, but of peace, of the responsibility to remember. Hiroshima begins to become a city of memory even before fully rebuilding. The temples are slowly reborn. The castle, destroyed, will be restored years later as a symbol of resilience. In the city center, near the explosion's epicenter, a half-ruined building, the former prefectural industrial promotion hall, remains standing. No one has the strength to tear it down, and its silhouette, blackened and roofless, becomes unwittingly a monument to the tragedy. In time, it will be known as the Atomic Bomb Dome, and its image will travel the globe. By the late 1940s, survivors begin to speak. They do so timidly, fearing rejection, because many outside Hiroshima avoid them, worried that radiation is contagious. But their voice persists. They begin to organize, to gather, to write letters, to bear witness. I was there, they say, and each story adds a piece to the puzzle of collective memory. The word hibakusha ceases to be a label and becomes a title of dignity. They are the guardians of remembrance, the bearers of the warning. By mid-century, Hiroshima is no longer only a place, but an idea, a universal warning, a wound that teaches. Architects rebuild the city following a new principle, to turn pain into a space for reflection. The Peace Memorial Park is born, a place where trees and ponds replace the destroyed avenues. At its center, the eternal flame burns with a clear purpose, to remain lit until the last nuclear bomb on Earth disappears. Reconstruction does not erase the past. It integrates it. Hiroshima rises, yes, but with memory in every brick, in every tree, in every silence. New generations grow up amid the echoes of fire and the murmur of water. The city, once a symbol of destruction, slowly begins to transform into a symbol of hope. And as the evening wind blows over Peace Park, carrying in its breeze the murmur of the Ota River, life once again asserts itself with unshakable serenity. For out of the ashes, Hiroshima has learned to bloom again. And in that resurrection, silent and luminous, begins the story of those who decided not to forget. Time passes, and yet, in Hiroshima, the past does not recede. It remains suspended, floating over the constant murmur of the Ota River and the distant peal of bells that mark each new dawn. The city is rebuilt, schools fill once more with young voices, streetcars run along newly traced avenues, but under every stone, under every tree, the memory still beats of the light that changed everything. It is a recollection that does not impose itself with violence, but whispers, patient, waiting to be heard. The hibakusha, the bomb survivors, are those who sustain that whisper. For years, many of them kept silent, not because they had forgotten, but because speaking hurt, and also because the rest of the country was not always willing to listen. In post-war Japan, where poverty, hunger, and reconstruction consumed all strength, the hibakusha were viewed with compassion, but also with misgiving. Some believed they were marked. Others feared radiation might be contagious. Many survivors hid their past in order to find work, marry, or simply live without being singled out. But silence, however deep, eventually cracks. As the years go by, voices begin to emerge, one by one, timid at first, then firmer. The testimonies of those who were there begin to fill notebooks, to circulate in newspapers, to reach classrooms. They are accounts without rhetoric, without adornment, narrated with the calm of those who no longer seek to explain the inexplicable, but to leave a record. I was at school when the light enveloped me, says a teacher. I saw the sky turn white and then dark, writes a boy who survived under the rubble. Each story is a spark, and together they form a constellation that illuminates the human side of the tragedy. Some survivors decide to devote the rest of their lives to telling what happened. They become storytellers, guardians of memory. They travel to schools, universities, international forums, carrying in their voices the testimony of the most radical experience of modern history. They speak with serenity, without hatred, but with a clarity that shakes. I do not desire revenge, says a woman named Setsuko. I only desire that no one else ever live what we lived. Her words, repeated over the years, become a form of peaceful resistance, an act of faith in human conscience. In the 1950s, the Hiroshima community unites to build a space that gives meaning to loss. Thus, the Peace Memorial Museum arises, a place where objects speak as much as voices. In its display cases are everyday remnants: a rusted bicycle, a school backpack, a clock stopped at 8:15. They are fragments of life frozen in time, turned into universal symbols. Visitors walk in silence through the halls, and the murmur of their footsteps seems to converse with the echoes of the past. Whoever enters there does not merely observe history, they feel it still breathing. Over the years, the Hibakusha also become activists. They fight against nuclear proliferation, write letters to the world's leaders, participate in international conferences. Some, elderly now, travel to countries that possess atomic arsenals to ask for what they consider a sacred promise: that Hiroshima be the last. Many do not know English or diplomacy, but their mere presence, their gaze, the tremor in their voice, say more than any political speech. In Japan, their struggle inspires new generations. Young people, children, and grandchildren of survivors take up the torch. They begin to record testimonies in audio and video, aware that time, again, is an enemy. When we are no longer here, say the elders, the words must speak for us. Thus, oral archives are born, recordings, documentaries that preserve the voices of those who witnessed the dawn of the atomic age. In each account, one senses the same blend of pain and tenderness, of fear and gratitude for having remained alive. The echo of the survivors does not resound only in Japan. Around the world, artists, writers, and filmmakers begin to gather their legacy. Poets like Sankichi Toge, who survived the bomb as a teenager, write verses that become hymns. Let the dead speak. Let the ashes tell their story, so that fire may never be born again in the human heart. His poetry, translated into dozens of languages, becomes a universal prayer. And so, slowly, Hiroshima ceases to be only a city. It becomes a conscience, a constant reminder of what human beings can do and what they must never do again. Peace Memorial Park, completed in the 1950s, becomes the symbolic heart of that conscience. Every August 6th, at 8:15 in the morning, bells ring and the entire city observes a minute of silence. Thousands of paper cranes, Japan's symbol of hope, are placed on monuments and statues. Many are dedicated to a girl, Sadako Sasaki, who died of leukemia years after the explosion. Believing in an ancient legend, she tried to fold 1,000 cranes to make a wish: to live. She did not succeed, but her gesture crossed borders and generations. Today, millions of children around the world still fold cranes in her memory. From then on, Hiroshima becomes a meeting point for peace. Political leaders, scientists, survivors of other wars, and ordinary travelers visit the city to hear its stories. There are no triumphant speeches or flags, only silence, water, and bells. In that space, humanity seems to recover, if only for an instant, its capacity for reflection. Hiroshima teaches without imposing, remembers without resentment, warns without condemning. The hibakusha's message is as clear as it is humble. What happened must not be repeated. There is no justification, no possible excuse. Science, progress, and power make sense only if they serve life. With each passing year, fewer living witnesses remain, but their echo keeps growing, as if the city itself spoke through them. Hiroshima, which was once silence, is now a voice. A voice that does not shout, that does not accuse, that simply says, "Remember." In 1964, the Tokyo Olympic torch passes near Peace Park. For the first time, the world sees Japan not as enemy or victim, but as an example of rebirth. Hiroshima, in that context, becomes a symbol of reconciliation. Its light, which was destruction, begins to become a guide. Today, new generations walk the same streets where once nothing remained. They see leafy trees, streetcars, cafes, and can hardly imagine that beneath their feet lie layers of burned history. But on every corner there is a sign, a stone, a name that recalls it. The city has not rebuilt by forgetting, but by remembering. That balance between life and memory is what makes Hiroshima a unique place, a territory where hope and mourning coexist, where the past is not erased, but transformed into teaching. And when night falls, the reflection of modern lights mingles with the river's glow. From afar, the city seems serene, almost new. But if one listens closely, between the sound of water and wind, the voices can still be heard of those who live to tell it. Soft, persistent voices that travel beyond time. And while that collective voice continues to resonate in every corner of the world, one feeling makes its way. The certainty that remembering is not looking back, but keeping alight the flame that prevents darkness from returning. Dawn over Hiroshima today has nothing extraordinary about it. The sun rises gently over the rivers, trees reflect its gleam in the water, and the rumble of the streetcar passing by Peace Park blends with birdsong. It is a morning like any other. And yet, it is also a miracle. Because every ray that touches this city also touches the history of all humanity. It is the same light that once destroyed everything, but now illuminates the life reborn over the ashes. In the city center, the atomic bomb dome stands like a scar time has learned to respect. It is not a sad ruin, but a witness. Around it, trees grow lush, children run, elders walk slowly, looking at the river. Each step they take on the rebuilt ground is a silent affirmation that life can more than destruction. The air, clean and mild, no longer burns but caresses. No one who walks here can ignore the paradox. The same sky that brought fire now brings calm. For decades now, every August 6th, at 8:15 in the morning, the sound of a bell cuts through the air. Thousands of people fall silent. Some close their eyes. Others bow their heads. Along the river, hundreds of paper cranes float slowly, bearing messages written by children's hands. Words of hope, of apology, of longing. There are no slogans or harangues, only a shared silence, a form of prayer without religion. In that instant, Hiroshima does not belong only to Japan. It belongs to the entire world. Each year, delegations from countries come here. Some represent their governments. Others come simply as individuals who need to understand. Among them are scientists, war veterans, students, families, pilgrims. All find in the city a lesson not taught in books, that of human fragility and strength, of the destruction that gave way to learning. Hiroshima does not accuse. Hiroshima shows. In its serenity, there is a depth that compels one to pause. It asks for nothing, except that remembrance stay alive. The hibakusha who still live, few now, with white hair and trembling hands, attend the ceremony each year with a calm that only time grants. Many have devoted their lives to telling what happened, not to relive pain, but to protect the future. Some carry photographs of those who died. Others simply gaze at the river in silence. Their presence is a lesson in humility. They speak not of hatred or revenge. They speak of compassion, because they understood, perhaps before anyone else, that memory only makes sense if it leads to peace. The Memorial Museum, rebuilt and expanded, welcomes visitors from all over the world each day. In its halls, time seems to dissolve. Objects remain suspended in transparent cases. Stopped clocks, school uniforms, notebooks with dark stains. There is no dramatics, no noise. Only a murmur of footsteps and the gentle voice of audio guides that narrate what happened with respect, without artifice. Many visitors leave with tears, others with a deeper silence than the one they brought. For Hiroshima does not shout, but its message engraves itself on the chest, like an ancient truth that needs no explanation. Outside, life goes on. Markets open, bicycles roll, young people chat in cafes. The city is modern, clean, filled with light. No one could imagine, seeing it, that barely 80 years ago it was a smoking wasteland. But memory is not buried. It lives in the park's stones, on the riverbanks, in the ceremonies that each year renew the commitment never to forget. In schools, children learn the story not only as a lesson from the past, but as a promise for the future. Peace is not a gift, their teachers tell them. It is a task. That idea, so simple and so profound, has become Hiroshima's essence. The city has learned that memory must not be a burden, but a beacon. That remembering does not mean living in pain, but preventing pain from repeating. That is why its reconstruction was not an act of pride, but of humility. Architect Kenzo Tange, in designing Peace Park, conceived it as an open space, without walls, where past and present could coexist without fear. There, silence is as eloquent as words. And each visitor, in crossing it, understands that history does not end with tragedy, but with the decision to learn from it. In the world, the name Hiroshima remains synonymous with warning. Whenever humanity approaches the abyss of war or of unbridled power, that word returns. Sometimes in political speeches, sometimes in songs, sometimes in whispers of those who fear forgetting may be more dangerous than destruction itself. Hiroshima has become a kind of collective conscience, a moral compass, reminding us of what we are capable of, for good and for ill. And yet not everything in its legacy is tragedy. There is also beauty in the way life pushed through, in how a devastated city was able to offer the world a message of compassion. For Hiroshima did not rebuild with anger, but with patience. Not with resentment, but with hands that wished to heal. That choice, silent yet firm, was its greatest victory. The survivors understood it better than anyone, that the only possible answer to fire was light. That is why their words are not shouts, but whispers. Not accusations, but warnings filled with love. If ever the world forgets, an elderly hibakusha said at a commemorative event, let the wind remember. For it saw everything. That phrase, spoken in a breaking voice, sums up the spirit of a city that learned to dialogue with time. Today, as evening falls, the river's waters reflect the lights of new buildings and the floating lanterns that children set adrift with care. Each carries a written wish: peace, hope, life. The water bears them slowly, and for a few minutes, Hiroshima looks like a constellation in motion. The wind blows softly, as if caressing the words that rise toward the sky. The city, which one day was the epicenter of horror, has become a place of meeting, a sanctuary where humanity looks at itself with a mixture of awe and responsibility. And if one pauses for a moment, one can feel it, that invisible pulse that unites all who once lifted their eyes to the sky in fear, and all who today lift them in gratitude. For we still live under the same light, the same that destroyed, the same that warms us today, the same that invites us, each dawn, to choose again between shadow and clarity. Hiroshima's story does not end in the past. It continues in every decision, in every generation, in every act of kindness that prevents violence from setting the sky ablaze again. And so, as the sun descends over Peace Park and the bells ring for the last time that day, the city seems to whisper something that does not belong only to its inhabitants, but to all of us. May remembrance endure.
May life continue.
And may the light, this time, never burn again. We have traveled together through shadow and light, following the echoes of a city that learned to be reborn from the ashes. Perhaps, as you listened, something within you also remembered the importance of tending the peace we share beneath this same sky.
If you wish, tell me what the story has left you with. I would love to read you.
Rest, breathe calmly, and may you have a very good night.